Hey guys, I hope you are doing great out there today. We're going to finish our notes on the civil rights movement today. Um, Yesterday, we were kind of talking about the basics of the civil rights movement. We kind of finished up talking about the sit ins, the swim ins, the kneel ins, and so forth. We talked yesterday the major leader of the civil rights movement and equal rights for African Americans and other minorities out there was really Martin Luther King. And one of his biggest things is the March on Washington in 1963. He went to Washington, D.C., and he gives his famous I Have a Dream speech. Uh, in 1963 in Washington. There was more than 500,000 African Americans showed up to support him. He gets up and he goes on and talks about the importance of civil rights, really trying to push the people of Congress and the president to adapt new things for civil rights. Those people showed up. He gives the I Have a Dream speech, and it becomes instantly famous. Moving on to the school integration, we talked yesterday, Brown versus Board of Education legally said that segregation of schools was illegal. The Supreme Court ruled that they no longer could have segregated schools. Now, in the South, though, a lot of people were like, come make me desegregate. They really tried to drag their feet and not desegregate their schools. And so eventually the federal government has to step in and use the military or National Guards to start desegregating schools. And you see this in several different things. You'll see it in Little Rock, Arkansas, at Jackson State in Mississippi, and then throughout. One of the famous movies that kind of depicts desegregation of schools is Remember the Titans, and that shows really how in the South, like Alexandria, Virginia, how they forced them to desegregate, and at first how nobody liked each other, and then they eventually progressed out of that. Now, out of the school integration, the idea of federalism comes in. When federal troops are sent to make law or states follow federal laws, the civil rights movement was mostly getting the federal government to make state governments follow the federal laws. They were making federal laws, but those state governments weren't following, especially Alabama and Mississippi. And so the federal government is sent into those states and forces those states to adapt to the new federal laws. You can kind of scroll through the pictures there, and one, like I said, is Little Rock, Arkansas. It was a famous desegregation case. At the University of Mississippi, James Meredith started attending in 1962. U.S. Marshals and troops were sent in to ensure that he was protected. There was actually a couple people shot and kind of some riots over this, but he does end up getting his college education at the University of Mississippi. You can kind of scroll through your pictures there and see different things of the civil rights movement. Now, another thing will be in Montgomery, Alabama, was kind of the hot spot for segregation and the civil rights movement. The African Americans will do a lot of marching and protest and things like that. The police commissioner, Bull Connor, he really didn't like this idea of African Americans getting civil rights. So he sends the police in and he says that to break up these demonstrators, they were to use water hoses and guard dogs. And you can see in the pictures with the German shepherds attacking African Americans, or the water hoses being used on the demonstrators to try to get them to disperse. In Birmingham, 500 kids were arrested and attacked with dogs. There was much more support for civil rights legislation after this. When this happens, it's depicted in pictures and put in magazines and newspapers all over the country. And people start really seeing the struggles that the African Americans are having in the South. And so when they see this, the sympathy towards the movement will really grow. And it really pushes the Senate and House of Representatives and the President to sign civil rights acts. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1964 banned segregation in public places, such as restaurants and buses, hotels, things like that. The Civil Rights Act was created by President Kennedy, but he was assassinated before he could really get it pushed through. So when President Johnson comes in, he pushes the Civil Rights Act through Congress, and they pass more pro-civil rights laws. He will get more pro-civil rights laws passed than any other president before him or after him. He gets the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 1968, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then they create the 24th Amendment, banning all poll taxes. Now, while all this is still going on, the freedom, they're still protesting and doing things. One of the things is the Freedom Riders. Once the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed, and it said that buses could no longer be segregated, a group of young men and women, both white and African American, will test this out. And they start to go around the small town bus stops and highways. The core of volunteers were those young white and black Americans. They will get on the buses and sat interracially on the bus. And then when they got to the lunch counters at the bus stations, they did the same, trying to break it up. Now, this will turn violent in Alabama. The Freedom Riders on a bus there will be several buses that were bombed. There will be buses that the tires were slit and people were beat up and things like that, because people in the South did not want this type of change. Before JFK had died, Martin Luther King's wife, Coretta, will call JFK while Martin Luther King was in jail, and he and say, hey, you need to protect these Freedom Riders. So he eventually will send federal protection to the Freedom Riders and proposes those new civil rights legislations. And that is it for your until your questions. Hey, remember, guys, your questions are due on Friday. I hope everybody's having a great day and everything's going good. So next week we will have a new set of PowerPoints. We're going to move to the Cold War, things like that. So hope everybody's having a great day. Bye.